So we've got a look at a first 10th edition vehicle datasheet. Rhinos are confirmed at Toughness 9. We've got some rules on vehicle degrading and a few other armoured teasers. Let's talk about war machines in 10th edition 40k. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking vehicles and tanks. Games Workshop previously had told us that they'd inflated the toughness of a whole bunch of units, and that really does seem to be the case. In the latest teaser, we've got a new datasheet for a Rhino, a bunch of stat lines for other Space Marine tanks, and just a bit more info in general about tougher vehicles and degrading profiles. I thought we'd start out with the Rhino datasheet, go through that bit by bit, and then go on to the rest. So first up, here we have the Rhino. It's got the Adeptus Astartes keyword and the other usual ones that you might expect. It is listed as dedicated transport, and I guess for that reason it means that you can take up to 6 of them in a force if you really want to. On its stat line, it's kind of similar to how it is previously, still moves 12 inches and has 10 wounds with a 3+ save. The two interesting bits though are the toughness and the objective control. It's gone up to toughness 9. Previously that's been only associated with very strong things like the Rogue Dawn Battle Tank, Chaos Land Raiders or Baneblades. Obviously I'm sure a whole bunch of weapon profiles within Warhammer 40k will have also been changed to reflect the new toughness, but we have seen a whole bunch of small arms that haven't really changed all that much. It will make a difference with things like bolters wounding this thing on a 6 now, rather than on a 5 and being genuinely quite dangerous if you do take a whole broadside from them. Generally the toughness change is likely to mean that you're just going to need a fair bit more specialist kits to actually bring down vehicles, and volume 5 just isn't going to be quite as good in a pinch. The other interesting stat on the stat line is the objective control. I did kind of wonder how this might be reflected for vehicles. We've got a few more profiles later, but it looks like a Rhino is the same as 2 infantry models on an objective or 1 troops model. Just a tiny bit more powerful than it is currently maybe. Currently it just counts as 1 model with no obsec. Going through the abilities, it looks like we've got a couple more core abilities here. First up, it seems that they've consolidated the explosion rules with the Deadly Demise rule. This one's Deadly Demise D3, and in the free text they confirm that as you'll be taking D3 mortal wounds to enemies nearby if the tank does explode on the 6 as before. It doesn't specify the range on this one. I guess it will probably be 6 inches. I guess that means that explosions are going to be a bit more standardized. Probably scaling fairly similar to how they are now. I guess things like dreadnoughts might blow up a little bit at a bigger blast radius if the distance that they blow up is standardized. I guess it also confirms that mortal wounds are still very much a thing in 10th edition. I'm not sure if we've actually heard any mention of those so far, but looks like that's one core mechanic that isn't going away. The other interesting bit is something called the firing deck. This one's firing deck 2, and this is the number of models that are embarked on the transport that can fire out of it. It does look like we're going back to the era of Rhinos having troops inside that can fire and take pot shots out. I feel like this is perhaps more big news for the Rhino rather than the game in general. There are plenty of transports in the game that have rules that allow you to fire the guns out of them. The Rhino isn't currently one of them though. That rule was removed in ages past. Could be quite nice to have something like a tactical squad with a missile launcher or special weapon in it, and those 2 guns taking shots out of the top hatch. Next up, I think it's worth noting that Oath of Moment is on here. I did strongly suspect that it will basically be applying to all Space Marine units, including non-core vehicles as they will be at the moment. The fact that it's popping up on a Rhino I think makes it quite likely that it is indeed everything. Space Marine units focusing fire is going to be pretty brutal, even the Rhinos can chip in. Next up we've got the Rhino's unique ability. At the moment it's at least sounding like each datasheet in 40k will probably get something interesting of its own. The Rhino's one is self-repair, and I guess that works well with its fluff and previous rules. At the start of your command phase, this model just regenerates 1 wound. Again, this one's maybe a bit of a throwback to previous editions. I remember in 7th edition and before, you could roll a dice and on a 6 it would regenerate a whole point. A bit of a credit to its rugged construction and basic self-repair systems. Out of the keywords, it's got most of the ones that you'd expect, but I also noticed the smoke keyword on here. Currently the smoke keyword allows you to use the smoke stratagem to allow it to hide from enemy shooting a bit. With 12 core stratagems in the game, I wonder whether smoke might well be one of them. It does seem like it's a bit of an annoying one that's popped up in a few armies rules before, just being reprinted in a whole bunch of codexes where it's relevant, where it should probably just be standardized. If it is representing a stratagem, I'd kind of hope that it wouldn't be one of the 6 Space Marine ones in the Gladius Strike Force. I feel like that would be a bit of a waste of a stratagem when you've got so few to play with. Then we've got weapons, and the Hunter Killer missile seems even more dangerous than it was before. It's now gone up to 48 inches, a single shot once per game. The ballistic skill has been upgraded to a 2+, it's now a big strength 14, AP 3 and damage D6. Seems like this thing is going to be a solid enough threat to just about any tank around. Obviously not going to be killing them in one shot, but has a good chance of taking a chunk out of it with a 2+ to hit and then such a high strength characteristic. Feels like GW are doubling down a bit on trying to make those a bit more dangerous and different to the standard missiles. In 8th edition they just had the same profile as a standard crack missile but one shot. Then in 9th they gained extra strength going up to strength 10. Now at least compared with the Cyclone missile launches on the Terminators, they've got extra strength, AP and also ballistic skill. The Rhino also gets its Storm Bolter as well. This one basically the same as the one that we saw on the Terminators. They did say that they might vary the profiles depending on different units, but this still seems the same. Rapid fire 2, so 2 shots out to 24 inches, and with the new rules an extra 2 shots within 12 inches, so 4 shots there. Then every single unit seems to have a melee weapon listed now. The melee profile of the Rhino is 3 attacks hitting on 4s, strength 6 and AP 0 with a damage of 1. This is actually a decent upgrade on the previous vehicle combat profile. Previously they'd only hit on a 6. You are actually likely to cause a wound or two to light infantry with this kind of thing. Rhinos are actually somewhat dangerous in combat now and can be expected to roadkill 1 or 2 very light units. I think that's kind of handy to have for a nuisance vehicle that you could charge into the opponent just because you wanted to tie them up. Otherwise, I think there's a couple of interesting things that aren't here. First up, there's no sign of any sort of degrading profile for the Rhino. That would be a change compared with currently. 10 wound vehicles do tend to degrade in 40k at the moment. The Rhino takes ballistic skill and movement penalties. In previous previews, Games Workshop did say that the degrading profile will be listed as a single line on the vehicle's datasheet, and that doesn't appear to be here. I'd guess it might mean that some of the requirements for a degrading profile might have changed. Maybe it's 11 wounds or more, or maybe they're just going to leave dedicated transports without many guns out of it, as it's perhaps not quite as meaningful to begin with. I feel like if the Rhino was going to degrade, we will probably see it here somewhere. The other thing that I think is kind of weirdly missing from the datasheet is any sort of transport capacity, something to say it can transport this many models and what type. Really not too sure what to make of that one. I guess it's possible it could be listed on other units, say this unit can take a Rhino as a dedicated transport. I guess it could also be possible to be on an army construction page of some sort. Or this could just be a partial datasheet and Games Workshop just aren't giving us the full picture. I'd probably guess out of those that you might list transports that they can take on other units perhaps. I guess we'll have to see though. I guess that didn't appear on the Terminators one, who I guess will be able to ride in Land Raiders. In any case, that's a whole bunch of interesting clues as to how the vehicles are going to be working, but Games Workshop did also give us a whole bunch of other profiles for Space Marine vehicles as well. Just the stat lines and not weapons and more, unfortunately. The main thing that they were showcasing is that their toughnesses have increased. The Storm Speeders also gained a big Toughness 9 from Toughness 6, really quite a huge jump there. The Gladiators up to Toughness 10, and the Repulsor is up to Toughness 12. Again, some really quite big toughness inflation. You're not going to be able to pose serious threats to Storm Speeders just with a whole bunch of bolters now. Kind of surprising just how tanky a light vehicle is. Otherwise, the Storm Speeder's got a few other interesting changes. I guess it's possible they might be teasing that it's just got one consolidated datasheet profile now. It's just listed as a Storm Speeder, whereas the Gladiator is listed as a Gladiator Valiant. We might have got a consolidation there, or it might just be an image for the preview. Otherwise, it's also gained an extra wound as well. And we've got a few more objective control stats. The Storm Speeder and the Gladiator Valiant are a bit more hefty and threatening than the Rhino, it would seem, going up to OC3, and the standard repulsor is now the same as an entire squad of non-troops. That's gone up to OC5. Pretty interesting stuff. Most of the rest of the stats aren't changed. The Storm Speeder's down to 14 movement from 16, and it'll be interesting to see how tough these actually wind up being in practice. I feel like until we know the common weapon profiles that a lot of armies are going to be bringing, we don't really know which of these is going to be the really strong one, and how much things like Toughness 12 might matter over Toughness 10. As well as all of this, they have given us a bit of information on degrading profiles now. Overall in 8th and 9th there's usually been 2 or 3 different stats on each datasheet that degrade, often movement and the to-hit roll, but occasionally other things like attacks. As I mentioned, it does look like from that Rhino we've got no real hints as to whether that one will degrade. Looks like it probably won't, but in the free text for the article they confirmed that many vehicles won't degrade. They've tried to keep it to the ones where it might actually matter, and those ones will generally be fairly standardised, a -1 to hit when they're at 1/3 wounds remaining or less. They said that the information would take up a single line on the datasheet. Potentially it might just give us the wound characteristic at when that happens. In general, that rule does seem maybe a little bit less strong than the degrading profiles for vehicles are at the moment. A typical vehicle like a Repulsor or a Lehman Russ would likely get something like -1 to hit at half wounds or less remaining, -2 to hit at a quarter, plus likely some other penalties as well, such as a debuff to its movement. Seems like just getting a -1 to hit and later than before would weaken vehicle degrading. It would make vehicles a bit more all or nothing than they are at the moment. I guess a bit of a power trip if you are using the vehicles perhaps, but I can't help but think that at least somewhat powerful vehicle degrading rules were generally kind of handy, so that if you didn't quite manage to finish one off, your turn's damage dealing wasn't completely wasted. If your vehicles can be at 1 wound remaining with just a -1 to hit penalty and nothing else significant, that's going to be a bit more powerful than it was currently. It does also make me think that some armies are going to get hit by vehicle degrading a bit more than others as well. Armies with lower ballistic skill like Orcs and Guard are probably going to feel this a bit more than things like Custodes or Space Marines. I perhaps wouldn't be too surprised if Orcs might get some sort of tweaked rule with this. Literally cutting their damage output in half for most of their vehicles would be a bit painful. Finally, in terms of vehicle toughness, we got a little bit more information as well as the confirmed toughness profiles that we have for the Rhino and Stormspeeder, Gladiator and Repulsor. They also told us that the Stomper is going to be toughness 14 as well, which is a pretty big increase. It seems that Hunter-Killer missiles are strength 14 currently. I guess we'll have to wait and see what other common anti-tank weapons wind up being. Even so though, this does look pretty indomitable. Things like assault cannons will be wounding it on 6s, and missile launchers only on 5s. Otherwise, just for a bunch of other profiles that we've got, Cyclones are strength 9, Power Fists are strength 8, and they did give us a slightly cryptic teaser as to the infantry melter gun. They said that weirdly this will be less effective against the Rhino than it is currently. I guess with the Rhino going up to toughness 9, it might make me think that it could be a strength 9 weapon now. That would only be wounding on 4s rather than wounding on 3s, and I guess if it's strength 10 or more then it's still just as good. I don't know how accurate that was, but it seems a bit weird if genuinely the Rhino tank is now tougher against Melter. I'd kind of hope that Melter guns would be the weapon that would give you a fighting chance against vehicles. I guess given previous previews they might get the anti-vehicle rule, the one that allows you to auto-wound them on a certain value. Finally, for strength profiles, small arms do seem broadly similar, so it is going to put a lot of vehicles wounding on 6s against them. I guess those ones give us a bit of a teaser. As I said earlier though, I feel like we're not really going to be able to judge this new toughness system until we know what sort of strength of weapons people are going to be able to bring. We have only seen a small selection so far. Just from increased values though, it does seem that things like strength 5 weapons and strength 8 weapons might be a bit less used. Strength 8 currently wounds most standard vehicles on a 3+, and tougher things on a 4. Against basically all of the new vehicles though, strength 8 just really isn't going to be all that much. You'll be wounding most of them on a 5. I feel like perhaps the overall effect of the rule is going to be that you just need more specialist kit to take down vehicles, which definitely does make sense, though maybe does open up the possibility of some vehicle armies that just might be able to laugh off damage from certain enemies, either just because you've taken a whole bunch of vehicles and only some weapons are effective against them, or you might just have 1 or 2 vehicles that have a big toughness 14 or something, and then when you're playing against an enemy army they're either going to have the tools to be able to deal with that, or they're just not going to be able to kill it all game long. Might make it a touch harder to balance. Still though, we have seen a whole bunch of rules that are potentially quite punishing to vehicles already, even among the really limited things that we have seen of 10th. Lethal hits appear to be easily accessible both for Tyranids and for Space Marines. They're the ones where you get to auto wound on 6s to hit, and that's pretty much the perfect thing that you want for dealing with high toughness stuff. The Tyranids can just choose to pick it up army-wide, so their 6s to hit will also wound vehicles and monsters, and that really is quite a big deal. The Space Marine Oath of Moment also looks like it's going to be fantastically good at just shooting down one really big tough target each turn. That's the sort of thing that you could afford some mid-strength weaponry with, as if you're wounding on 5s re-rolling, that's really not too bad. We know we've got that anti-rule that can be used as anti-vehicle as per the chain fists. I feel like quite a lot of armies are going to be able to pick up a dedicated anti-vehicle weapon like this. Auto wounding on a set amount is going to be really handy for getting damage on the really toughest stuff around. Toughness 14 isn't going to help you if you're being auto wounded on 3s anyway. Finally, I kind of wonder if we might take a bit of an about circle, and sometimes very low strength weapons might actually be surprisingly efficient. If you can absolutely spam strength 3 shots at the enemy, say maybe if las guns were just very efficient to get shots on the table, then they might become weirdly efficient against things like toughness 14. You'd still be wounding a toughness 14 stomper on 6s, even with las guns that you could get a whole bunch of shots on. My guess would be that in general they're still not going to be that good, and you are going to want the actual tools for the job. But against targets like a Rhino now, a flurry of las gunfire is going to be just as effective as a flurry of bolt gunfire, which could be interesting. So anyway, some rather interesting developments there. Let me know what you make of the 40k vehicle previews down in the comments. How do you feel like armies like Knights and Imperial Guard are going to be faring in this new edition? If you've enjoyed the video and you'd like to keep up with Games Workshop's news and rules releases, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly be aiming to keep up with all of the new stuff that Games Workshop releases. Finally, if you've enjoyed the video, then I would just like to mention as well that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page, and that's what allows me to keep on making videos like this quite as regularly as I do. If you'd like to support and help keep these videos coming, then channel patrons do get a few advantages. You get to see certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.